As our story begins, a group of young gypsies make off with a stash of stolen horseshoes and nails, the spoils of thievery from the local blacksmith. When the smith finally tracks them down, he's confronted by their protector, an intimidating brute known as Dr. Grimsby Roylott. As he tries to retrieve his property, Roylott handily dispatches him, tossing him into a nearby stream. And thus begins the adventure of the Speckled Band. In writing the screenplay for this episode, Jeremy Paul was confronted with the challenge of creating a fresh and satisfying adaptation of one of the most popular and most filmed stories in the canon. In the introduction to his 1991 script book of The Speckled Band, the writer reminisced, "Canvassing among friends, I found a similar response to the news that I was doing The Speckled Band. 'It's the one about the snake,' they all said confidently. 'What snake?' I asked. 'What does the snake do, and to whom, and why? Who does the snake belong to, and what is its mischief and its ultimate fate?' I said. Most of them looked at me blankly. They were lost. We think we know the stories, all the familiar ones, but we don't at all. That's what makes rereading them such a joy. I find every time that a return to a story carries its own recharged pleasures. The sheer suspense of how it works out, Holmes's particular deductive skills, Watson's participation, and in the case of the Speckled Band, their raw courage in the face of terror. And always, I savor the incidental delights of their journey towards the denouement. With the Speckled Band, what I shall treasure is a superbly demonic performance from actor Jeremy Kemp as Holmes's adversary, Dr. Grimsby Roylott, and the usual excellence of our two protagonists and Granada's production team. As for the snake, ... Jeremy Paul, April 1991. At 221B, Sherlock Holmes stands smoking over his sleeping friend.
I'm very sorry, Watson, but it seems to be the common lot this morning.
What?
Mrs. Hudson has been roused. She retorted on me and I on you.
But it's only 7:15. What is it, a fire?
No. A client.
In their sitting room, Holmes introduces Watson to their guest, who sits trembling.
Mrs. Hudson, do you think you could bring this young lady a hot cup of coffee? For I observe you are shivering.
It is not cold which makes me shiver.
What then?
It is fear, Mr. Holmes. It is terror.
No, you must not fear. We shall set matters right, have no doubt. You have come by train, I see, this morning.
You know me, then?
No, but I observe the second half of a return ticket in the palm of your left glove. You started early, but you had a drive in a dog cart along heavy roads before you reached the station. But there's no mystery, my dear lady. The left arm of your jacket is spattered with mud in no less than 7 places. The marks are fresh. There is no vehicle, save a dog cart, which throws up mud in that particular way. And then only when you sit on the left-hand side of the driver.
You are perfectly correct. Sir, I can stand the strain no longer. I shall go mad if it continues.
The young lady introduces herself as Miss Helen Stoner and begins to tell her tale. She explains that she lives with her stepfather, Dr. Grimsby Roylott, at his ancestral home of Stoke Moran. Her father died young, and her mother remarried when Helen was only 2, and is now also deceased. But in the event of her death, had bequeathed a monthly sum totaling £1,000 a year to her and her older sister Julia, so long as they resided with Dr. Roylott. But when their mother died, a grim change came over their stepfather. He became reclusive, morose, and violent. only socializing with wandering gypsies to whom he gives clearance to camp on his grounds. But 2 years ago, another tragedy befell the family, when Helen's sister Julia died suddenly, under very peculiar circumstances.
2 years ago, Julia met a half-pay major of Marines to whom she became engaged.
Your stepfather approved of the match?
He raised no objection at all. But a fortnight before the wedding, the terrible event occurred which deprived me of my only companion.
Pray, be precise as to details.
It is easy. Every event of that night is seared into my memory. It was late, about 11. Julia had come into my room.
Smoking those awful cigars again.
My darling, what is the matter?
Helen, have you ever heard anyone whistle in the dead of night? I suppose you couldn't possibly whistle yourself in your sleep.
Certainly not. Why?
The last few nights, always about 3 in the morning, I've been woken by a low, clear whistle. I can't tell where it's coming from. I thought you might have heard it.
I sleep more heavily than you. It was probably those wretched gypsies.
Well, never mind.
Was it your custom always to lock yourself in at night?
Always. My stepfather has a passion for Indian animals. A leopard and a baboon wander freely over the grounds. Julia and I had no feelings of security unless our doors and windows were locked. I couldn't sleep. I had a vague feeling of misfortune. Julia!
Hearing Julia scream, Helen raced into the hall to find her sister staggering and delusional. Collapsing in her arms, Julia began to convulse, but was able to speak the words, "The band, the Speckled Band." Within moments, she was dead.
And you've no idea what might have caused...
This whistle and a metallic sound, you can swear to it?
It was my strong impression. I may possibly have been deceived.
Was your sister dressed?
No, she was in her nightdress. On the floor there was a candle and the charred stump of a match.
Which means something must have woken her up, and she struck a light to see what the matter was.
What conclusions did the coroner come to?
He investigated the case with great care, but he was unable to find any satisfactory cause of death.
And your evidence would have shown that the door was fastened on the inner side, the windows blocked by shutters, secured every night. It is certain, therefore, that your sister was alone when she met her end.
Yes. Besides, there were no marks of violence upon her.
What about poison?
The doctors examined her for it without success.
What do you think this unfortunate lady died of, then?
It's my belief that she died of pure fear and nervous shock. Though what it was which frightened her, I cannot imagine.
What do you gather from the allusion to a band, a speckled band?
Delirium.
Miss Stoner goes on to say that she herself has recently become engaged, and she is to be married within a few weeks.
So what prompted you to come here when your life seemed set so fair?
Yesterday, some repairs were started and my bedroom wall was pierced, so that last night I was forced to move into the chamber in which Julia died, to sleep in the very bed in which she slept. Imagine my terror when I was awoken by the same low whistle which had been the herald of her own death.
You lit a lamp.
Yes, but nothing was to be seen. I was too shaken to sleep. I dressed and slipped out of the house. I got a dog cart at the Crown Inn and came to London with the one object of asking your advice.
You did wisely.
Holmes notices bruises on Miss Stoner's wrist, and she reluctantly admits that her stepfather is to blame. He is a hard man, she says, but the only father she has ever known. Watson attempts to diffuse the tension with an offer of breakfast, but Holmes is impatient.
There are 1,000 details I desire to know before I decide on a course of action. If we were to come to Stoke Moran today, could we see over these rooms without the knowledge of your stepfather?
As it happens, he spoke of coming to town today on some business.
And the workmen?
I have seen none. We have a woman who comes to clean from the village, but only in the morning. There should be nothing to disturb you.
Excellent, Watson. You're not averse to this trip.
By no means.
Then we will be with you in the early afternoon.
I shall be there for your arrival. My heart is lightened already.
Miss Helen Stoner is played by Rosalind Lander. Miss Lander was born in Hampstead and received an early education at the Royal Ballet School in Richmond. She began her acting career at the age of 9 when she appeared in the Hammer horror film The Devil Rides Out, which was written by Richard Matheson and starred Charles Gray, who would go on to play Mycroft Holmes in the Granada series. In the book, The Television Sherlock Holmes, Miss Lander admitted that she hadn't actually read the original Conan Doyle story before filming and did not know what she would be asked to confront. But after filming was complete, she remembered, "I was brave enough to have my photograph taken with the snake, who had affectionately become known as Kevin, after a director we all knew." She made her West End debut in 1987, but then quickly made the move to Los Angeles, California, where she worked regularly on the stage and screen for years, including an appearance in Star Trek The Next Generation, as well as lending her voice to many animated series and games, including the Kingdom Hearts video game series by Disney. She has, since, voiced over 250 audiobooks, and in 2012 won an Audie Award for Best Female Narrator. She eventually returned to, and currently resides, in London. With Miss Stoner having departed the premises, Miss Hudson enters the room with breakfast. But just as Watson is about to indulge, the door is kicked open by a raging intruder.
Which one of you is Holmes?
My name, sir. But you have the advantage of me.
I am Dr. Grimsby Roylott of Stoke Moran.
Indeed, Doctor. Please take a seat.
I shall do nothing of the kind. I know that my stepdaughter has been here this morning. What has she been saying to you?
It is a little cold for the time of year.
What has she been saying to you?
But I have heard that the crops promise well.
Ah, you put me off, do you? You scoundrel, sir. I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
Your conversation really is most entertaining. If you would close the door on your way out, as there is a decided draft.
I will go when I've had my say. And don't you dare to interfere in my affairs. I know that Miss Stoner has been here.
Dr. Roylott quickly grabs a fireplace poker and raises it into the air. But instead of striking Holmes, he grasps it with both hands and bends the hard, straight metal into a curve, tossing it onto the carpet. He issues a final warning before storming out. Mrs. Hudson looks on in horror, but Holmes is not fazed.
Thank you, Mrs. Hudson. Just another client. What a very amiable person. I may not be quite so bulky, but...
Holmes picks up the bent poker and uses all his strength, re-straightening the twisted metal. He smiles at Watson and places it back at the fireplace.
Fancy his having the insolence to confound me with the official detective force. This incident gives zest to our investigation.
I only hope our friend won't suffer from her imprudence in allowing that brute to trace her here.
Watson eats, but Holmes dons his coat and hat, heading out to check on a hunch, insisting that he and Watson reconvene later at Waterloo Station. He also requests that Watson bring along his toothbrush and his revolver. Now, Holmes and Watson's illustrious housekeeper hasn't yet enjoyed a great deal of screen time in the first season of our program, but let's rectify that now and take a moment to meet our Mrs. Hudson, Mrs. Rosalie Williams. Born on June 12, 1919, in Barton upon Irwell, Lancashire, her parents were both teachers who spent the World War II years in the U.S., leaving Rosalie at their home in England. She attended Manchester University and was, for a time, the girlfriend of famed communist activist and folk singer Ewan MacColl, who stayed with Rosalie at her parents' house in Urmston for much of the war. In 1945, she met and married David Skase, who was the artistic director of the Library Theatre Company in Manchester. Also in the company was Jeremy Brett, and the two played together in a production of Othello, with Williams in the role of Desdemona and Brett in the role of young Cassio. It was at the Library Theatre where a young Michael Cox, in the role of an assistant stage manager, first became aware of his future Mrs. Hudson, and when production began on his own series, he cast her in the role after just one interview. To Richard Valley of the Scarlet Street magazine, Williams recalled, "When I was cast, I began to search the book to find reference to Mrs. Hudson, to fill in the character. Of course, I came up with practically nothing at all. In the text, she's almost a cardboard cutout. And yet, in everybody's imagination, she's a fully rounded person. But one of the first decisions I made was not to play her Scottish, which she had been played several times before, and only because of one line about Mrs. Hudson making porridge as well as any Scottish lady. But I'm not Scottish myself, and I didn't want to play her with any particular dialect or accent. I think it becomes a caricature when it's done that way. I also decided that her husband was in the army and had been killed in action. She was widowed and inherited the house in Baker Street and took in boarders to keep herself together. She is not just the housekeeper-servant. She is very much the owner of the property, and she runs it her way and by her rules. She has standards. They're Victorian standards, they're very high, and that's how she prides herself." As to her relationship with the great detective, Williams stated, "Primarily, I think she has great affection for him, because she knows him so very well. She can anticipate his moves. She's almost like a mother to him. She can nurse him, she attends to his needs, but she can also tell him off. When he throws a tantrum, she comes back at him. She may win or she may lose, but at the end of it, there will always be a twinkle between them as if to say, 'Well, you won that time, but I'll get you next time.' They understand each other and live together in a sort of harmony." For 10 years, she embodied the beloved matron of Baker Street. After the series finished, Rosalie Williams recalled her experiences on the show. She said, "I used to call it embroidery. Jeremy used to embroider things for me in my part. He used to come up with lovely little inventions, like when he gave me a flower in one episode. There were lots of moments like that, where Holmes revealed that Miss Hudson was so very close to him, which isn't in the stories, but it's something that developed because it was Jeremy and me. To a certain extent, we had to keep it in check, because the Sherlockians would have been critical if we stepped out of line. But he always did it with proper Holmesian panache. I miss Mrs. Hudson. I got to love her very much. Once I was on the set, I was her, and it was my room, and everything had to be just so. I flooded into her with great ease and with great pleasure. I was never a Sherlockian, but I loved playing that part as an actress." The Granada show was Williams' final on-screen role, though she enjoyed success in many plays and television programs in her lifetime, including roles on Coronation Street, Emmerdale, and a 1972 series called Holly, in which she appeared with David Burke. Rosalie remained married to David Skase for 58 years, until his death in 2003. In his lifetime, Skase became one of England's foremost repertory directors, spurring the careers of actors like Patrick Stewart, Anthony Hopkins, and Alan Rickman, and was himself known for many roles over the years. But he made one of his final appearances in the Granada Holmes series TV movie of The Master Blackmailer, where he played the part of the art gallery owner. Together, they had 3 daughters and a son. Rosalie Williams died on November 11, 2009. And if Jeremy Brett holds the title for the all-time greatest Holmes, I think it's only fair that that same honor go to Rosalie Williams for the role of Mrs. Hudson. Later, on the train to Stoke Moran, Holmes and Watson compared the fruits of their inquiries.
I've seen the will of the deceased wife. Her annual income at the time of her death was a little short of £1,100, but due to the fall in agricultural prices, is now no more than £750. Each girl, in case of marriage, could claim £250, so if both girls had married, our beauty, Grimsby Roylott, would have had a mere pittance.
And even one marriage would ruin him.
He had the strongest possible motive. Oh, did you manage to find Coombs?
Yes, I did. He did know Roylott in Calcutta, confirmed what the girl had said, and added one intriguing fact.
Now, it seems that a series of robberies had been perpetrated in his house, and suspicion fell on his native butler. Roylott promptly seized the man, and in a fit of anger beat the poor fellow to death. Narrowly escaped a capital sentence, but suffered a long term of imprisonment and returned to this country a morose and disappointed man.
Ah, Watson. It's a wicked world. And when a clever man turns his brain to crime, it's the worst of all.
Michael Cox often spoke highly of chief designer on the series, Mike Grimes, calling his contributions enormously successful. But when it came to the railway compartment in which Holmes and Watson traveled to Leatherhead in this episode, Cox was less forgiving. In a study in celluloid, he recalled, "We wanted to recreate the first of many journeys which our heroes made by train, so we needed an authentic carriage which moved through a real countryside. No studio mock-up with back-projected scenery would do." Mike's solution was to build a 3-sided compartment, beautifully dressed with buttoned upholstery and leather window strap, and mounted on a flatbed truck, which would accommodate the necessary film, sound, and lighting crew, as well as the actors. The truck could then be driven through a convenient rural location to produce the illusion we wanted. Or so the theory ran. Unfortunately, this unusual vehicle proved that there is no such thing as a level country road in the northwest of England. The contraption bumped and swayed alarmingly, and after it had driven up and down the smoothest and quietest stretch we could find more times than I can remember, it was abandoned. But we got 2 important scenes out of it, and a fair approximation in the first of them to one of Sidney Paget's most famous illustrations, from Silver Blaze. Holmes and Watson arrive at Stoke Moran, under the auspices of being architects meeting Miss Stoner to survey the property. Holmes examines the outside windows of the house, and Watson uncovers the paw print of a large animal in the lawn. When interviewed by Rosemary Herbert for the Armchair Detective magazine, Jeremy Brett discussed the inspiration he took from the Sidney Paget illustrations for scenes such as these. He said, "First of all, no one wanted to make the films with those poses at all, but I kept going back to Doyle, and Paget had done the drawings. Well, the treasure hunt started. I went deeper and deeper into the texts, paying attention to all aspects of it, including those illustrations. Well, sometimes it was quite funny in actual fact. There's a wonderful description in the book of Holmes moving through the rose garden like a golden retriever. It's a wonderful image, but when you actually try to do it, it's very funny. But by this point in the production of the series, Jeremy Brett was beginning to have serious misgivings about the production schedule he was being asked to adhere to. In Peter Haining's television Sherlock Holmes, he remembered, "When we first started, I was getting up at 3 a.m. to prepare. It takes a lot of effort to go deeper into a story so that it's not simply a parody. I was bouncing a scene like a trampoline. I'd be polishing my magnifying glass and eating breakfast and making up all while doing 26 pages of dialogue. I seemed to have more lines than I'd had hot dinners. By 4 p.m., when the director wanted fire, my fire was out. I remember Michael came onto the set and I said, 'Can you have a word with the powers that be? I cannot make these stories on 1 week's rehearsal. To bounce the words, I really should have 2 weeks.' The result was that Michael got us 2 weeks for rehearsal, and then we had 3 to 3.5 weeks for actual filming. It was a tremendous upheaval in the Granada schedule, but I promised them, 'I will last longer if you take care of me.'" A fun fact about this location here: the Georgian country mansion shown in these scenes was actually used twice in the Granada series. The interior shots from the final sequences of The Solitary Cyclist were filmed inside this very building, in its black and white wing, built in 1581. But the exterior, with its Palladian portico, was constructed in 1757, according to Michael Cox. Finishing with the building's exterior, Holmes and Watson move inside to the room of Julia Stoner, where a number of oddities present themselves.
Where does that bell communicate with?
It goes to the housekeeper's room.
It looks newer than the other things.
Yes, it was only put there a couple of years ago.
Ah, your sister asked for it.
I never heard of her using it. We used to get what we wanted for ourselves.
Indeed. You will excuse me while I satisfy myself as to this floor.
Holmes drops to the ground, examining it with his magnifying glass. But finding no clue, he tugs on the bell rope, surprised to find that it has no bell attached. He also notices another modern addition, a ventilator leading to the next room. From there, they move into Dr. Roylett's chambers, and once inside, Holmes questions his host.
What's in here?
My stepfather's business papers.
Ah, you've seen inside it, then?
Only once. Some years ago. I remember it was full of papers.
Is there a cat in there?
No. What a strange idea.
Well, look at this.
No, we don't keep a cat.
Ah, well. A leopard is a large cat, after all.
Yes, but a saucer of milk wouldn't go far in satisfying a leopard.
Holmes casts a mischievous grin in the direction of his friend before revealing another clue, a common dog leash, but with a small loop tied at one end. In his mind, Holmes has put the puzzle together, and they depart. But outside, the detective formulates his endgame.
Miss Stoner, it is very essential that you absolutely follow my advice in every respect. Your life may depend on it.
I assure you that I'm in your hands.
Now, in the first place, on the way here, we passed a small cottage.
The shell house?
Would the windows of your sister's room be visible from there?
Yes.
You are sure?
Yes.
Then we shall make it our base. Now, Miss Stoner, when your stepfather returns, you must confine yourself in your room on pretense of a headache. Then, when you hear your stepfather retire for the night, you must go to the windows, undo the hasp, open the shutters, and leave your lamp on the windowsill as a signal to us. Then withdraw with anything you may want for the night to your old room I've no doubt that in spite of the repairs, you could manage there for one night.
Yes, of course.
And now we must leave. If Dr. Roylott should return and find us here, our journey would be in vain.
I believe, Mr. Holmes, that you've already made up your mind. For pity's sake, tell me the cause of my sister's death.
Be brave. If you do as I have told you, rest assured we shall soon drive away the dangers that threaten you.
In Bending the Willow, Jeremy Brett remembered one of the challenges he faced during the filming of this scene. We had nearly completed filming at Adlington Hall, and we had one scene to do. It was where I assure Helen Stoner that all will be well and tell her what to do that evening to avoid further danger. It was quite a long speech, and the light was fading fast when we set up the shot. I realized that if I didn't get it right the first time, we would probably have to come back the next day for this one scene. I gritted my teeth and did it the first time. On watching it back, I put down some of my nervous gestures to my anxiety about getting the shot in the can before the light went. David Stewart Davies adds, "The nervous tenseness fits in with the mood of the shot, but rewatching the scene with this knowledge, one can also observe a faint sheen of perspiration on Brett's face as he contends with the complicated lines and fading light." Holmes and Watson make their base inside a nearby cottage, overgrown with vines. As the sun sets, they wait for Miss Stoner's signal, and the two friends reflect on the situation.
When a doctor goes wrong, he's the first of criminals. He has nerve. He has knowledge. Palmer and Pritchard were among the heads of their profession. This man strikes even deeper. I really have some scruples taking you tonight. There's a distinct element of danger.
If I can be of assistance.
It's very kind of you.
You evidently saw more in those rooms than was visible to me, Holmes.
But I probably deduced a little more. Do you remember Miss Stoner said that her sister could smell Dr. Roylott's cigar?
Well?
The ventilator. A ventilator made, a cord hung, and a woman who lies in the bed dies.
I can't see any connection.
Did you notice anything peculiar about the bed? It was clamped to the floor. Could not be moved. Had to remain in the same relative position to the ventilator and the rope, for so we may call it, since it was clearly never made for a bell pull.
I begin to see dimly what you're driving at. We're only just in time to prevent some subtle and horrible crime.
Time passes, and the evening draws on. Watson dozes, but Holmes is on the alert, waiting for the signal. Finally, the light appears, and Holmes rouses his friend. As they leave cover, Holmes arms himself with a long, thin cane, and together they sneak to the house, avoiding the roaming cheetah and baboon. They cautiously enter through the open window and silently wait in the darkness. Holmes warns his friend not to fall asleep, as his very life may depend on it. Trembling, Holmes readies his candle, his matches, and his stick before turning out the final light. Then, in the dead of night, Holmes hears a sound and lights a candle. What lies before him requires all of his nerve to confront. He raises the stick and swats at the intruder, forcing it back up the rope.
You see it, Watson! You see it! means that it's over. And perhaps for the best. Come, Watson, bring your pistol.
They burst open the door to Dr. Roylett's chamber and find him inside, dead, a serpent coiled around his neck.
It's the band, the Speckled Band. It is a swamp adder, the deadliest snake in India. He has died within seconds of being bitten.
Holmes cautiously retrieves the leash and manages to wrangle the snake from Roylett's neck, locking it away inside the safe.
Violence does, in truth, recoil upon the violent. And the schemer falls into the pit which he digs for another.
The foiled Grimsby Roylott was played by English actor Jeremy Kemp. Kemp was born in Chesterfield, Derbyshire in 1935 and was trained at the Central School of Speech and Drama, the same school where Jeremy Brett received his training. After national service with the Gordon Highlanders and the Black Watch, Kemp took to the stage, making the rounds of repertory theaters and joining the Royal Shakespeare Company, where he won the Carlton Hobbs Bursary Award, which led to a contract with BBC Radio's drama company. His on-screen career took off after playing the role of P.C. Steele in the original cast of Z Cars in 1962, but afraid of being typecast, he quickly moved on to a diverse array of roles over the ensuing decades, including a memorable part in the 1976 film The 7% Solution, where he had his first run-in with the great detective as he played the villainous Baron Karl von Leinsdorf. Of note, this film also starred Charles Gray as Mycroft Holmes, a role he would return to a few years later in the Granada series. Kemp also famously appeared in Star Trek The Next Generation, where he played the role of Captain Picard's older brother, Robert. Sadly, he very recently passed away after a long struggle with ill health on July 19th, 2019. The stylized final sequence of this episode, wherein Holmes confronts the poisonous serpent, presented a new kind of challenge for the Granada cast and crew. In Bending the Willow, Michael Cox recounted, "We were worried about the idea of hitting the snake. We pulled back from what could be seen as cruelty to a dumb animal. But you've got to remember that an actress who will allow a snake to crawl all over her gets my vote for courage above and beyond the call of duty." On the train back to London, Holmes and Watson recount the details of the mystery to their traveling companion, Miss Stoner.
The idea of a snake occurred to me when I coupled it with the knowledge that the doctor was furnished with a supply of creatures from India.
A form of poison,
Rapid and lethal.
which couldn't possibly be discovered by any chemical test.
It might or might not bite the occupant of the bed. She might escape every night for a week, but sooner or later, she must fall a victim.
Oh, my poor Julia.
The doctor had trained the snake, probably with the milk, to return at the sound of a whistle. The very whistle which you and your late sister heard. My inspection of the chair in Dr. Roylett's room had shown that he had been in the habit of standing upon it to reach the ventilator. Last night, when I attacked the snake and drove it back through the ventilator, I roused its snakish temper, causing it to turn upon the next person that it saw.
Dr. Grimsby Roylott. So you, Holmes, were indirectly responsible for his death.
I cannot say that it is likely to weigh very heavily on my conscience.
In his book, A Study in Celluloid, Michael Cox reflected back on the Speckled Band. He wrote, "Seeing the film again so many years after we made it, I noticed how the relationship between Holmes and Watson was growing. The jokes about Watson's appetite were sustained, and the doctor is firmly established in 221B. David Burke was doing exactly what I had hoped he would, and making Watson a man whose company one would enjoy. Jeremy Brett is perhaps a little waspish and unsympathetic at times, and he was criticized for that. I think it took him some time to find that Holmes has, as Conan Doyle says, a great heart as well as a great brain. But then, Conan Doyle wrote that line in 1925, 38 years after he had created Sherlock Holmes. First broadcast on the ITV network on May 29, 1984, at 9 p.m. The Speckled Band was actually the second episode filmed and perhaps one of the most true to the original source material. Dramatized by Jeremy Paul and directed by John Bruce, both whom we've met before. And we'll see their work again very soon. Jeremy Paul on The Musgrave Ritual and John Bruce on The Red-Headed League. I think The Speckled Band is truly one of the classics of the Granada series. But let's discuss as we're joined by my partner in crime, Luke. I feel like there's a lot to dive into on this one, but I don't want to disappoint the Limerick fans out there, so here it is, The Speckled Band. The debased Grimsby Roylet can bend metal pokers which Sherlock can mend, and then move on to net that Ophidian threat and save the young girl in the end. Courtesy of Isaac Asimov. So, in American classrooms, this is the one that gets taught to introduce children to the adventures of the great detective. But actually, I personally never did read any Sherlock Holmes in school. Well, I mean, I did, but not because it was being taught. My first Sherlock Holmes book was the Penguin paperback of A Study in Scarlet with the white cover, which I remember carrying around with me until it got destroyed through my carelessness. But did you read this one in school? Did you read any Sherlock Holmes in school?
No, we read the Baskervilles.
Oh, really?
The Baskervilles, yeah.
Nice. I never really understood why this is the one that gets taught around a lot. I mean, it's great. It's very well written. It was Conan Doyle's favorite of all the Sherlock tales he wrote, but it's never been my number one favorite, but to each his own, I guess.
I think so far, of the ones we've done, this is my favorite.
Really?
Because it's like a real serious mystery.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's threat of death.
Yeah. Well, this was the first Granada episode that I ever saw. One of the longest intros, 8 minutes before we even see Holmes and Watson. A lot of stuff going on at the beginning. I don't know. Let's just jump right in. What are your initial observations and thoughts?
I made a lot of notes.
Really?
And I don't know if we'll get to half of them.
Yeah.
But let's talk about that fight scene with the blacksmith.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I mean, besides the fact that he takes a swing and then waits a good 2 banana
right
before.
I chalk that up to bad editing.
Yeah. But there's an illustration in the Baring Gould book, which is Roylett actually picking the guy up and chucking him over the railing. Yeah.
Speaking of Paget illustrations, there's none at the end of this episode.
Yeah.
They decided to show us.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Because we're going all the way to the very end. You should watch through the credits if people listening, if you haven't, because you get the snake, but then right at the end of the credits, you see the scene where Holmes is smacking it with a cane.
Yeah, I mean, and again, they don't show it in the show, but I think the reason they put it in the credits is because they wanted to show that they captured that exact moment from the Paget illustration. Yeah, which is cool. It's a good moment. There's a note in the Klinger annotations, which is less to do with the show, but it kind of made me laugh. Maybe I'll just jump to it. We can jump around. In the story, when Holmes yells out, "You see it, Watson?" Watson writes, "But I saw nothing." And there's this funny kind of nitpicky note in the Klinger book, but I thought it was worth sharing because it made me laugh. It says, "In The Hound of the Baskervilles, Watson was able to discern a boy's figure at a distance of several miles with the naked eye. Yet that was an isolated case, and more often Watson professes an inability to see clearly as Holmes. Several scholars conclude that Watson suffered from various visual deficiencies, night blindness resulting from a deficiency of vitamin A, extreme nearsightedness, and color blindness, caused by the, quote, glare of the sun in the cardboard box." I just thought it was funny that they determined that he has a vitamin A deficiency.
Yeah.
I don't know. It made me smile.
That was in the Baron Gould as well, but I thought just the way it was written, that he could discern a boy's silhouette from miles away.
Right.
Was kind of funny.
Other things that are different between the show and the story, when they're examining the room and they find the leash, in the story it's called a lash. And everybody just assumes that lash is interchangeable with leash.
Yeah.
And maybe it is. I don't know for sure, but I've looked it up, and it doesn't seem that there's any dictionary out there where there's an alternative definition of the word lash to mean a dog leash. So if it's a lash for a dog, a common dog lash, meaning like a little dog whip.
What could be?
I mean, in the story it says the lash, however, was curled upon itself and tied.
Yeah, because he says, I don't know why it should be tied.
Right, but he says it's made of whipcord, which again,
right.
it's a whip.
Yeah.
You know? So I don't know. It's also very strange, like the one they used in the show. It's just this little tiny thing, which is perfect for a snake, but
or
why
a whip.
Or a whip.
To whip a dog.
Right, but why would you use it for a leash?
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. I think it was kind of funny when he sees it. He says, it's HULLO.
Yeah.
Which my mind is, hello.
Yeah.
Here's something interesting. And then he finds the lash.
Yeah, exactly.
He doesn't do that in the story, in the episode, but I thought it was funny.
But all things considered, I mean, this episode is almost word for word the story. I mean, there's a lot of words swapped around.
There's a couple of things omitted. When Miss Stoner leaves Baker Street, and he says, what do you think of it all? He says, it seems to me to be a most dark and sinister business. And then Holmes says, dark enough and sinister enough.
Yeah.
But then later, when they're sitting, waiting to go in, he says, Holmes, I cried, I see dimly what you're hitting at. We're only just in time to prevent some subtle and horrible crime. And then he says, subtle enough and horrible enough.
Yeah. Yeah. That's actually probably my favorite scene in the episode, is when they're in the shell house, as it's called in the show for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I think that's my favorite scene.
And that was a great rearranging of the dialogue.
Yeah. Well, but it's funny, if you do look at it and you see exactly where they took words out of Holmes's mouth and gave them to Watson. I mean, I know David Burke was actually really concerned when they started making this episode, because I think they counted it up, and Watson has a total of 42 words in the story, and Holmes just has all the dialogue. So they gave him a lot of Holmes's dialogue.
Yeah.
But what's even more interesting is in the script book by Jeremy Paul, if you read it, there were lines that were written for Holmes that they actually gave to Watson on top of all that. So it's like, it seems like even maybe just on the set, they were like, let's just give that line to Watson.
And when you know that, because like I was reading along again, Jeremy Brett gives him like a little cheeky glance when he says his line.
That's right. Yeah, and it's funny how it changes the intonation and the meaning behind the line. Like when Watson is delivering it, I can't remember the exact line, but the one you just mentioned, when he's like, it might be solved along those lines. When it's coming from Watson, it really is different.
It's like, I'm already there, and now you're catching up. Good
right,
job,
exactly,
Watson.
right.
Yeah.
Or maybe you're wrong, Watson.
Right.
Because you're Watson. And I'm Holmes, and if I were to say it, it would have weight.
But it sounded like when if it would have been Holmes saying it, it would have almost been sarcastic.
Yeah.
Because he's like, well, clearly it was this.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're lost.
Yeah. It's funny how it changes it.
The scene when they're outside, when he's looking at the shutters.
Yeah.
And Watson's down on the ground. He's like, Watson, what are you doing? He's like, well, I'm using your methods.
Yeah.
Like that wasn't in there.
No.
But, like that was a fun little addition.
Yeah, there's another fun little thing that happens right there, which I know you're watching it on Blu-ray like I am, but in the really nice HD version, when he pulls the leaf away from the paw print, there's like a squirming little worm in there. Did you notice that?
No.
Go back and watch it. It's like it's kind of amazing.
I did notice something that I wonder if you noticed. It's perhaps not the final tribute to Jeremy Kemp, but in his last shot on screen, as they pan up his body and you see the adder, it had shit all the way down his body.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't think I noticed that.
Yeah, it's like green.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
They kind of tried to block it out, and like I think they actually pushed the snake over it so you couldn't really see it.
Yeah. I'll have to look for that for sure.
Some rewatch value there.
Worms and snake shit. I don't know. Most of my notes are actually from the annotations because, again, not to fall back on the same familiar things that I always say, but I think this is basically a perfect episode. To me, this is, again, the second episode they filmed.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how they did so well right at the beginning.
One thing I would say is not maybe quite perfect, and no disrespect to anyone involved. Miss Stoner's sister, her wig, maybe not the finest wig that's ever graced the screen.
Yeah, and she's also supposed to be her twin sister.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming that was difficult to...
That was probably difficult, but what I was actually impressed with was the tone of their voice.
Yeah.
I think she might have matched Helen Stoner, but they both had that low quality of voice.
Yeah.
I thought it was an interesting detail. I didn't remember they were supposed to be twins, so that...
Yeah.
There were some discrepancies or, subtle changes that I thought were interesting, and some I thought, I wish would have been in there. But in the story, Julia comes out of her room with a match in one hand and a matchbox in the other.
Yeah.
And she talks about writhing around with her arms and, clawing at her, but she's got her hands full. And I thought that was an interesting detail because I wonder if it meant like she was clutching her hands, like she couldn't open her hands or something.
Right.
Because of the venom.
Yeah, not to change the subject, but that's another example of a line that was originally Holmes's line where he says, so she obviously lit a match to see what was going on when she woke up, but they gave that line to Watson, and then it just seems like such an obvious, dumb thing to say.
Yeah. Well, that too, and also what about breakfast?
Yeah.
That was something Holmes said.
Yeah.
Won't you say for breakfast? But when Watson says it, it's just this conversation's boring. How about breakfast?
Right.
But there was a line that I really liked. Julia says, oh my God, Helen, it was the band. It was a Speckled Band. There was something else which she would have fain have said, and she stabbed with her finger into the air in the direction of the doctor's room. But fresh convulsions seized her and choked her words. I just like that line. Stabbed her finger into the air.
Yeah.
I thought that, I was imagining the shot, and then it wasn't there.
Yeah. In the past, we've talked about how the Sherlockians and how the authors of the annotated books like to nitpick the railway timetables.
There's a lot in this one.
There's a lot, but what's funny is there's a note in the Klinger book that says it refers to a book called The Curious Problem of the Railway Timetables, which, hard to believe there's actually something someone wrote about this, but Roger T. Clapp wrote the piece, and in it he refers to the Bradshaw of the period and the ABC Railway Guide in discovering that Holmes's new client could not, in fact, have followed the route described here and still reached Baker Street by 7 a.m. The earliest train from Leatherhead to Waterloo left at 7:22, arriving at 8:11. Even the earlier train to London Bridge did not leave Leatherhead until 7:13. In short, Watson must have altered the location of Stoke Moran, presumably to protect the confidence of Holmes's client, without correcting the train times. Clapp notes that there is only one correct train time given in the entire canon.
I really don't think he cared. But weirdly, reading it this time, I don't know, I got this weird other vibe from it, which was, even though he says Watson said it wrong, they keep bringing it up every time she mentions something. So, the author is even just questioning Miss Stoner. And then I noticed Holmes is questioning her, saying, you didn't tell me everything.
Yeah.
He's abusing you, and grabs her wrist all violently. And then later on, Roylett's even questioning her, where were you, you little liar?
Yeah, she's just kind of a punching bag in the episode.
She's a punching bag, and there's also an attempted murder plot on her life. It's she had it pretty bad in this one.
Yeah, exactly. There's a note that I wrote down, which is I didn't know what it meant when she said the half-pay major of Marines.
I didn't either.
But it was just, I guess, when it's reduced pay for officers not on active service. Watson was described as being on half pay in the Sign of Four, so I guess they got paid all the time when they weren't, active.
Right.
So, interesting.
There was, I think we're nitpicking ourselves right now on a lot of things, but there were, obviously a lot of great things, because I said this is my favorite so far. But I will say, I was really paying attention to Rosalind Lander as Miss Stoner, And the scene where she wakes up and lights the match, if you just watch her finger, I think she burns herself.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Because it looks like a real reaction, and that match burned quick.
Yeah. There's kind of a quality to this episode, which like a visual film quality, and a lot of it's kind of obvious things like putting a, not really, but Vaseline on the lens, you know what I mean? Like softening up the frame and kind of the lighting and the color and everything. It feels older than even episodes in the same season, This
is one of the very first episodes I noticed that they're shooting into mirrors a lot.
Yeah.
And glass and using reflections. It was really, I thought it was really effective, but it was also very, one time confusing, because as I was reading along, at the end of the story, when they say you can see the match light through the ventilator, or the lantern light through the ventilator, I was waiting for that, and I was watching Holmes because there's light on his face, and then he lights the match. And I thought I missed it, so I ran it back. But I went back to where you see Watson, and the shot of Watson is into a mirror. And so you can see the ventilator over his head,
right,
but it's in the reflection in the mirror. So I was like, oh, that's a really interesting touch. Because then they got two things out of that shot.
Yeah. But most of the time in any of those shots, you can't actually see the snake.
Yeah.
I don't think there was ever a snake.
No, but you can see...
Yeah,
you can see
some
somebody doing something, like they're shoving something through, which I thought was...
Yeah.
It was effective. It was good.
Yeah, it was good. I must say, speaking of the snake, the commentary that Martin Dakin puts in his book continues to make me smile. I won't read the whole thing out, but he nitpicks this point that snakes are actually stone deaf and don't drink milk. And he paints a funny picture of the futility of Roylott's endeavors, but he puts a cap on it saying, quote, "We have to speculate whether Grimsby Roylott didn't die from snake poison at all, but by apoplexy brought on by his Herculean efforts to whistle back a deaf and unresponsive reptile, aided by a general exhaustion caused by too frequent indulgence in fireplace poker bending." I don't know. It made me laugh.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Speaking of calls and whistles and things, there was something that was in this episode for the longest time I couldn't figure out what it was. And it's this animal call that I think it happens more than once in this episode, and it happens in the Priory School.
Yeah.
And it's just something that's kind of peppered into some of these episodes.
Yeah.
And I figured out what it was eventually.
Yeah.
But it's this animal that in the background is going, wow, wow.
Yeah.
You know what it is?
I don't.
It's a peacock.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't remember how I figured that out, but once I did, I was like, damn.
Yeah. It's funny because you do hear it often in this show, and the thing that I always think when I hear that sound is, oh, here's that stock sound again, because it just seems like, again, the benefit of having these shows on Blu-ray, DVD, digital, whatever, and being able to watch them back to back, you start to notice that the train always sounds the same, and the horse hooves always sound the same, and that bird call is always there.
It's true. But I mean, I think it works.
Yeah.
Because I think it just says, look, we couldn't find a peacock for this episode.
Sure. But that one's very specific, I guess it's exotic, and it adds something. But yeah, I've always liked it.
Well, something I was going to point out that was pointed out to us on Twitter, Greg Jameson, he sent us a link that says, great idea if you get back to the UK for a few days in northwest England for a few locations. One that's been spruced up is Dr. Roylott's house, and it's called Adlington Hall.
Yeah. And
you go to adlingtonhall.com. You can stay there, you can rent it, you can have your wedding there, and they have a whole thing about shooting if you want to film there.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, we actually are headed back to London shortly here. So maybe we can check it out. I don't know.
Yeah.
Speaking of the grounds, the gypsies, there's a note in the Klinger book about gypsies, and it says, gypsies, or their preferred name, Roma, began migrating to Europe from northern India in the 14th century. Various ethnicities and languages began melding together, etc., etc., but it talks about how the gypsies make appearances a number of times in the canon. They appear as convenient bystanders in The Hound of the Baskervilles and the Priory School, and John Clay's ears were pierced by gypsies, if you remember. They noticed, Holmes noticed that in the Red-Headed League. So, anyways,
Teaser.
Gypsy Notes.
Yeah, Gypsy Notes. Let's talk about pouring brandy down her unconscious throat.
Yeah. That was in the book, right?
Yeah. And there was an annotation on it as well that talks about Watson and how he uses brandy as an almost universal specific.
Yeah.
But I think it talks about dosages here.
Mm.
He suggests a dose of 25 cc's of whiskey or brandy, roughly an ounce, and that should be repeated every 10 to 15 minutes, according to the effect.
Medical advice from Dr. Watson.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because I've noticed, I watch a lot of old movies and shows, a lot of film noir and 40s stuff. Brandy is always being bandied about as a cure-all, I've noticed.
Yeah.
And I've actually kind of taken to collecting different brandies as a result of this. So I noticed that note as well and found it interesting. And yeah, in the Klinger book, there's a note about the brandy as well. It says, in Victorian times, brandy was used to, quote, restore one to normal after loss of blood, in convalescence, and after serious injury, in cases where one felt faint and in actual faintings. And it says, Watson makes liberal use of it in his medical care.
Yeah, there's a similar note in the Baron Gould which says, its temporary usefulness as a quickly acting stimulant can scarcely be doubted in the various forms of sudden circulatory collapse, syncope, exhaustion, hemorrhage, and traumatic shock.
Mm.
So everybody get some brandy.
Brandy goes
This
all around.
episode is brought to you by
Yeah.
brandy.
Yeah, I've collected a lot of brandy. Peach brandy, cherry brandy. It's
all the flavors.
Good brandy is actually kind of hard to find nowadays because everybody uses flavored brandy as mixers in drinks. So you get this cheap junk, but good brandy is actually, it's really good.
Yeah. Let's get into the good stuff. Let's get into the stuff we like.
Yeah.
I still smile when I see Watson's jovial entrance. When she's got like a veil over her face and she's clearly shaking and, cold and scared by the fire, and Watson just comes in all smiling and hello.
Yeah. I will say probably my favorite Watson moment in this episode is his very first line when Holmes is waking him up and he's like, I'm so sorry, Watson. And he's like, what? I love that line.
Yeah. Is there a fire?
Yeah.
Also, when he pours her the tea, instead of standing next to, maybe it's just for blocking for the camera, he stands directly in front of her and pours her a tea.
Yeah. Feels very proper.
I guess.
Yeah.
Felt weird to me.
I'm sure you're going to have the same one, but probably my favorite Holmes moment in this is when they're first starting to talk to Miss Stoner and she says, I can stand this strain no longer. And Holmes gives her this hand gesture that's like, give it to me.
Yeah.
I love that little moment.
He also hunches over her and is peering at her as she's talking, but that's almost an exact copy of the sketch.
Yeah.
Which again I thought was great.
Yeah.
Just seeing it embodied, but also it being Jeremy Brett doing it just seemed natural for him.
Yeah, the entire scene in Baker Street when they're talking to Miss Stoner, after a while it just becomes all close-ups of Jeremy Brett's face.
Yeah.
And real close-ups. Like his shot is closer than everybody else's. It's just his face.
Well, he's loving it too.
Yeah.
Because when she's talking about being awakened by the whistle, he's smiling.
Yeah,
he's
and his eyes are getting big.
Yeah.
But how many actors can literally carry a show with their face filling up the screen
reacting
for 5 minutes?
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah.
It's so it was the right choice. The director did a good thing there.
Yeah. And then when Roylott busts in, Watson just spins around in his chair.
Yeah.
And then when Roylott is talking to Holmes, and he goes into his Holmes the meddler, and it says, my friend smiled. Holmes the busybody, his smile broadened. Holmes the Scotland Yard jack in office, and Holmes, ha!
Yeah.
I love those little just air, exiting his body, and then his eye. He does his little eye dart again when he says, "Close your door on the way out."
Yeah.
I just love those little Jeremy Brett moments.
This one's written really well.
Yeah,
they're all good, but this one is very tight.
Yeah.
Yeah, we already said it, but probably my favorite scene, my favorite overall scene. It's hard to say because that scene with Grimsby Roylott and Baker Street is, it's just classic. But I really like the scene in the shell house because it's Holmes and Watson kind of being a little bit more intimate. And, Watson saying, "You obviously saw more in those rooms than I did." And then when
That's
Watson,
another line that I love too, when he says that and he's like, well, maybe I deduced a little more.
Yeah. But when he finally explains it and Watson gets it, it's really good Watson acting.
Yeah.
It's like, I begin to dimly see what you were driving at. You know, it's good. It's a really good moment.
It's a great episode.
Yeah.
And all of the Holmes, Jeremy Brett pronunciations of things with R's in them.
Yeah.
I think of extras, and he's like, the characters are like rolling her R's, and she's like, "There's an R, you need to pronounce it."
Yeah.
And Dr. Grimsby Roylott.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a couple times if you're just listening to the audio, which I have to do to edit the show, if you're just listening to the audio and you're not watching it, he's a little rough on some of those. Like he's struggling in his mouth. You can kind of hear it.
There's one moment where I think he starts to dip into Vincent Price for a second.
Really?
Yeah, and I think it's in the shell house. I was just noticing it, and I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was something. It was either when a clever man turns to his brain to crime, or it was when a doctor goes bad. It was one of those, but it started to just sound like Vincent Price to me.
Yeah, as great as these episodes seem and as kind of perfect as they kind of seem, again, editing them and listening to it in the headphones, you really start to hear places where cuts were made.
Yeah.
There's a couple that come to mind. Scotland Yard, Jack in Office. It's cut together from different pieces, and if you really listen,
get that perfect performance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If you really listen, it's rough when you're just hearing the audio. I just watched it again after hearing the audio so many times, and just looking at it, you don't even notice it. But when you're really listening to it, you really do.
Yeah.
And another one is when he says, "Excuse me while I satisfy myself as to this floor."
Yeah.
Like it's cut really badly.
That's one of my favorite lines from all the episodes.
Yeah.
Also the moment where when they're in the trap and Holmes says we're architects.
Yeah.
He then puts his hat over his eyes.
Yeah.
I just thought it was a great moment. And
silly.
Then the part where he's like, when Watson is talking about Miss Stoner being such an admirable woman, and he says, "Who do you mean, dear fellow?" He's like, "Miss Stoner, of course, most admirable." And then she's standing right there.
Yeah, that's a really weird moment because it's in the story, it's in the book.
Kind of,
but it's not pushed in that way.
Yeah, well, it's like it's another case of like Watson being into women.
Yeah.
And Holmes kind of joking with him about it.
Yeah.
I thought it's a great moment.
Yeah.
And obviously they came up with that for the show, so I thought that was a really good touch.
Yeah, it's fun. I actually went and read the script book of that moment just to see if it was actually like alluded to that's what was supposed to happen. Yeah. It was supposed to be a trick on Watson, but it's not really. It's not really written that way.
It just came out that way.
Yeah.
That was a great decision. Whoever decided that one. Well, one thing, I mean, I'm very interested in hats, and no mention of the deerstalker in this episode.
No mention of it?
No.
What do you mean?
Well, he's wearing a deerstalker in the show.
Yeah.
There's
you
no
mean
mention
in the
of
story?
it in the story.
Yeah.
And the Sidney Paget illustration, he's wearing a bowler.
Yeah.
I was curious to go back through these episodes and see when certain hats emerge.
Yeah.
And, if they're referenced or,
Well, if you think about it in terms of the order they were shot in, Solitary Cyclist was first, and he's wearing the deerstalker and the...
I wondered if it was like...
We're just going to wear it every episode, people.
Yeah. Well, I wondered if it was... Look, we're putting these ones out first.
Yeah.
People got to know it's Holmes. We need a deerstalker.
Yeah. Probably there's a lot of press photos and stuff being done then, too.
For the first few episodes.
Yeah. But it made sense. I mean, they were out in the country.
It makes basic sense.
Yeah. The famous picture from Silver Blaze that they kind of recreate where Holmes has his hand on his other hand and they're talking in the train car. It's actually, that picture's from Silver Blaze, but you know, they were kind of going for that image. So, it's cool.
The other just weird clothing note I noticed in this episode is Holmes, or Jeremy, I don't know whose decision it was, much more careful with his jacket. When he puts it down on the bed, he taps it to make sure it's flat.
Interesting.
Whereas like in later episodes, he just chucks things on the floor and
Yeah.
throws his hat into the other side of the room.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the bad. I don't know that there really is a heck of a lot, but there's one thing that it's really the only thing on my list, and I'm sure it's on yours, which is the second time when Grimsby Roylott says Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office, and then he just kind of like puckers his face for the camera.
I love it.
I don't even know what that means.
He's just so angry.
Yeah.
I do love it.
I just wonder if that actor knew what his face looked like in that moment, you know? Because I doubt anybody went, can you try to make it look like you're...
Well, that's another thing that, you know, from the story is that they were saying, I can't remember exactly now, but like he had almost no skin on his nose.
Yeah.
So he's meant to look like an old bird.
Yeah.
Like an old bird of prey, I think they say, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think in that moment, it's like he's like sucking his face into his skull or something. You know?
Yeah.
Getting some of that. And I like it. It's just this long dolly shot of him just
it's
scowling.
definitely interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a little, wow, that was weird, kind of a double take when he does it. Because it's kind of like he's totally normal until that very last second, and then his face just kind of like collapses in on itself.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's weird. It's a weird one.
All right, well, let's vote on this one. Persian Slippers. I don't know. I'm trying to decide if I want to give it the best vote ever because it's not my favorite episode, but it is basically perfect. I think I'm just going to say, I'm just going to give it a 10.
Yes. I'm going to give it 10 Persian Slippers overflowing with tobacco.
Nice.
One of my favorite lines from a later episode is, I used to have my work and tobacco. Now, only tobacco. That's a ways away, so
that's a very long ways
teaser.
away. Yeah.
But that line always makes me laugh.
Well, I have a couple emails here that we've received, and I thought we'd just do a couple. One came in from a listener named Claire, and she said, I just listened to the Solitary Cyclist episode and wanted to clarify that defrocking is a disciplinary measure in the church. It means the license to carry out duties has been removed and clergymen can no longer give Eucharist or marry people, etc. That's right, but I did look this up a little bit because we come from a Southern Baptist background, not so much practicing anymore. But
praise the Lord.
Yeah, but Catholicism isn't our bread and butter. So, but the difference and the confusion here is really between Orthodoxy and Roman Catholic denominations. From what I can glean, and this is probably going to bore a lot of people who know this stuff already, but Roman Catholicism includes the idea of the, quote, indelible mark on its clergy. So defrocking is sometimes used to refer to being deposed or deposition, but it's less correct because with the Roman Catholic indelible mark, you really are always a clergyman, as you said in the episode.
Mm-hmm.
You can only be defrocked, which means you can no longer serve as a priest or whatever, but you're still a clergyman. But in Orthodox theology, when you're deposed, you really are just returned to the rank of a layman. You're no longer clergy at all in any way. You know, but in the story, it doesn't actually say whether he was Orthodox or Roman Catholic.
Sure.
So we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know for sure.
Yeah. Well, Claire goes on to say, totally agree. The Solitary Cyclist is a 10, especially the scene with, did I really do remarkably badly? And Holmes says, yes.
Yes.
It's perfect. Claire says she lives in London and works there, but was too young to appreciate the series when it was on. She's been watching all the episodes and is now getting ready to read Bending the Willow. Great choice, by the way. She says, keep up the good work. So that was nice.
If you live in London, you should go to the pub.
Yeah, well, yeah, she probably has been, I'm guessing.
Well, the pub was pretty, I mean, I thought it was pretty impressive. I didn't know what it was going to be. I thought it was just going to be like...
Tourist trap?
Get a plate of Sherlock fries.
Yeah.
You know, but it was, they did a lot in there.
Yeah, well, I hope we can go back. I'm not sure what part of town we're going to be in on our next trip, but we got another note from Bo, also known as ex-Lion Tamer. He said a couple things. One, he clarified that the Clive Marison audio series is available for download on archive.org. I still haven't gotten around to checking those out yet, but I will soon, maybe on this next trip to England. Also, he went on to say he couldn't believe that they went with the crooked man over the Reigate Squire. He says, watching Jeremy as Holmes feigning madness and going hands-on with the Cunninghams would have been a blast. I agree with that. He also says, I also can't believe they couldn't find a suitable street lamp to stay true to the canon in The Crooked Man. They managed to scare one up for the 6 Napoleons. I think Luke's 7 Persian slipper rating is appropriate. At least they hit the next one out of the park with the Speckled Band. So yeah, thanks, Bo.
I have a personal tidbit.
Yeah.
Poncho, my little dog. We bought him this snake like 6 years ago from a drugstore on a whim. Just like, we'll bring something home from Poncho, and it was like this unstuffed snake, and it's like one of the only toys he hasn't completely destroyed over the years, and we call it a Speckled Band.
Nice.
And he knows it by name. So when we're doing things, like he'll go get it after food, and we'll go get your Speckled Band, and he goes and finds that.
It's too bad the Stoner sisters didn't have Poncho around.
Damn right.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have for this one. If you would like to get your voice on the show in the form of an email or audio recording, please do drop us a line at contact@sherlockpodcast.com. And if you'd like to help us keep the lights on here, we have a Patreon account at patreon.com/SherlockPodcast, where we are just about to post our first bonus video, a little book review of sorts, but something I thought fellow fans of Jeremy Brett would enjoy. And as always, we'd like to thank our new friends, followers, and subscribers out there: Muppet1331, Samish Girl, John Billings, Plonkstein, Kate, Abby Rose, Karen, Matthew, Jeremy, Flick Amadeus, Daniel, Sunny AZ, Ricardo67, Parallel Case of St. Louis, Navid, Sherlockaner, Claire, Billy Bunter, Danielle, Buddy, Little Starlet, Piers, Benjamin, Improv Sherlock, Charlie, Angelo, and Dale, of course. And apologies if we missed anyone. You can also find us on Twitter at twitter.com/SherlockPod. Next week is another amazing episode, The Blue Carbuncle. See you then.